This is my diagram of the trachea and lungs. To begin with, I would like to discuss the overall anatomy. Here is the trachea, the right lung, the left lung, and the diaphragm. This is a frontal view of the lungs and their lobes. The right lung has 3 lobes, a superior lobe, a middle lobe, and an inferior lobe. Also here is the oblique fissure which divides the middle lobe from the inferior lobe. Within these lobes there are further segments that I would need a 3D model to show you. The left lung consists of 2 lobes, a superior lobe and a large inferior lobe. The middle space labeled accounts for middle structures such as the heart. If I lift these off, you can see the internal structure of the lungs, which I will discuss more in depth later. The trachea is right here. It is a flexible tube that is covered with 16 to 20 hyaline cartilage rings. My model does not account for all 16 to 20 rings, but I think you can understand the concept. These hyaline rings provide support for the trachea. These rings do not go entirely around the trachea and are not present in the posterior of the trachea to allow for further flexibility. Between the rings is a smooth muscle that is always in a state of contraction until the need for oxygen increases. When this need for oxygen increases, this allows the muscles to relax. When the trachea relaxes, it expands to improve the passageway for air to the lungs. The smooth muscle is very flexible, while the cartilage is very rigid. This creates a perfect balance of freedom for movement of oxygen to pass. The trachea is typically 11 centimeters long and 2 to 2.5 centimeters in diameter. It spans from the larynx, which would be right up here, and then it goes down and expands into the mainstream bronchus, which then flow into the lungs. The carina is located here, and this is where the main trachea divides into the mainstream bronchus. The mainstream bronchi have further divisions, which is termed the bronchial tree. Right here you can see the bronchial tree underneath all of the labels. It looks like a tree. If you use the analogy of a tree, the closer you are to the trunk of a tree, the larger the branches are, and there are less divisions. The further away from the trunk of the tree you are, the branches become smaller because they are split in many different directions. This idea can be applied to the bronchial tree in the lungs. There are 14 generations of bronchial tree in the left lung and 28 in the right lung, beginning with the trachea. The mainstream bronchi break down into the segmental branch, which is over here. From here, they break into subsegmental bronchi and then end in tertiary bronchi. But the divisions go further than the tertiary bronchi. If we go over to the right lung, from the tertiary bronchi you have the bronchi, then the terminal bronchi, then the bronchioli, then the terminal bronchioles, then we get into the final 7 divisions. The final 7 divisions are from the respiratory bronchioles all the way to the alveoli. The alveoli is where the actual respiration takes place. They do the real work of respiration. There are capillary beds that surround each alveolus, actually 2,000 for each alveolus, which carry oxygen to and from the heart. The alveolus are extremely small, which my model does not account for. They're only 200 to 300 microns. Our textbook states that if you line up 5 or 6 on a ruler, they wouldn't even take up 1 centimeter. The sponges that I placed in the left lung represent the spongy makeup of the lungs that occurred due to the regenerative processes of the alveoli with type 1 and type 2 cells. I think it is also important to point out that this is where the heart would be located, right here behind the left lung, and that the diaphragm that I did doesn't show how the diaphragm would actually tuck underneath the lungs and would be in a more bold, bowed up shape.